and they will walk humbly before you. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Most gracious Father, we pray for the Parliament of Barbados, especially the Senate now assembled, that thou would prosper all their counsels to the advancement and glory of thy church, the welfare and the safety of thy people. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. And let us say together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And may the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be upon us now and forevermore. Amen. Turn off.
I can see well, no problem, but more comfortable with them. I give John. I do. From short book with the standing order. This is a long session. Standing orders in there. There's noise. I don't leave over. I was going to be standing orders. I had mine in there. So what's this? where was it?
It was actually inside, isn't it? Right, so you can, well, so you have two sets of minutes, one to be confirmed, one to be deferred. And then the next one is set to grant, Senator Moore.
Yeah, yeah.
I beg and move that this thing be removed. That this be withdrawn.
Message from Her Excellency the Governor General. Announcements by Your Honor the President.
Yes. I'm to advise that I did hear from Senator Moore, who is abroad on government business and so will not be here today. And I also heard from Senator Rudy Grant. He too is traveling on business and will not be here today. Please tell me. Announcements. I don't think I have any announcements. No, you tell me. Pardon? But he got called minutes. Yes,
One to be deferred and one to be confirmed.
on the announcements, yes. There are two sets of minutes. The minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, the 19th of December, 2018, to be confirmed. You remove the motion that to be confirmed.
Mr. President, I beg to move that they be confirmed.
Yes, so the question is that the minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, the 19th of December, circulated, be now confirmed. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. And I also have the minutes of the meeting held on Wednesday, the 23rd of January, 2019. But those minutes are to be deferred.
Mr. President, I beg to move that those minutes be deferred.
Yeah. Pardon? The question is that the minutes of the meeting held on Wednesday, the 23rd of January, 2019, be deferred. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the motion is carried and the minutes will be deferred.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers, reports from select committees, questions to ministers, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sitting of the Senate, and moved by a minister.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting to enable us to deal with the Planning and Development Bill 2019 in all of its stages.
The question is that Standing Order 45-2 be now suspended for the balance of today's sitting. And the purpose of that is to allow us to deal, to bridge time and deal with the matter so indicated by the leader of the House in all its stages. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. No. We think the ayes have it. So, Standing Order 45-2 will be in effect for the balance of the day.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of the Immigration Amendment Bill 2019. Mr. President, I also beg to move the first reading of the Planning and Development Bill 2019 and also to move the first reading of the Immigration Amendment Bill 2019.
Question is that think I'm favor doing them one by one. The question is that the Planning and Development Bill 2019 be read in its for the first time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. And that the Immigration Amendment Bill 2019 be now read the first time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move the withdrawal of order number 1, the resolution to take note of the Green Paper on planning law reform. I think all honorable members would agree that the bill has superseded that, and there's no need then to discuss the resolution.
The question is, order 1 on the order paper, the resolution to take note of the Green Paper on planning law reform be now withdrawn. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. And so the resolution is now carried, and the Green Paper is now withdrawn.
Public business. Order number 4, in the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Planning and Development Bill 2019.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it gives me great pride this morning to rise and move the second reading of this bill, Planning and Development Bill 2019. A bill that many would say has been long overdue in terms of coming to the Parliament of Barbados. All over Barbados, I think all members are familiar with the myriad of complaints you would have heard over the years from all sectors of society as it related to matters of town and country planning, in terms of permission, in terms of development. We kept hearing stories year after year, year after year, regarding that entity. And I think, first of all, the government needs to be commended for taking the bold step in looking at reforming that entire process. When we bear in mind that the World Bank report of 2018, in terms of ease of doing business, had Barbados at 132nd place out of 190 countries across the world. But more importantly, when you looked at the time it took in terms of obtaining a construction permit in a country, Barbados was ranked at 155 out of 190. And the average time it took was 442 days from application to getting permission, approximately 14 and a half months, compared to our Caribbean neighbors, and in terms of Latin America, where the average time was 192 days, or just 6 months and a week or two. And obviously, this is an unsustainable situation, where we are 155 out of 190 countries in terms of the time it takes to get a permit for construction. Mr. President, our present legislation was enacted in 1965, over 50 years ago, and it clearly no longer serves the needs of Barbados, and this has been identified by governments for quite some time. It is neither efficient, nor is our system transparent. And indeed, many say as an impediment to investment, especially foreign direct investment, at this time when we need everything to assist us in recovering from this economic morass in which we find ourselves. In addition to that, in a small island like ours, it also lacked the policies and tools to protect our fragile environment and indeed our cultural heritage, which we all know is vitally important and one of the country's assets that we should seek to protect. In our manifesto in May, the present government committed itself to improving the quality and the speed of service delivery by the town and country planning, and this bill moves in that direction. We identified it as one of our mission critical issues to be dealt with, and here we are dealing with that. I believe it was within 2 months of taking over the government of Barbados that the government showed its intention by having a number of stakeholder engagements with persons who are involved in this sector. And I believe 2 sessions were held, one on the 16th of July and one on the 26th. In that, in addition to encouraging persons to identify, to participate, and look at the issues and possible solutions, and to have an input into the formulation of this new legislation, new proposed legislation. So it was a consultative process. And in addition to that, persons were encouraged to utilize the social media in terms of further participation. Following up from this consultation, there was the development of green paper, which was made available to the public for comment, and was certainly online, and persons were asked to read and to make contributions. The responses, I'm told, were quite tremendous from individuals, in the individual, speaking about basic principles. And indeed, there were comprehensive comments and detailed responses from those who were more technical, including some very detailed submissions and expressions of individual concerns. And all of this has been taken into consideration in terms of developing this bill. So as I said, all of these comments were taken into consideration. And indeed, as recent as last month, I believe it was, there was a discussion on the entire process. And again, coming out of some concerns that were raised, further amendments were made to the draft bill, which was discussed in the other place last Friday. I want to say at the outset, the whole process was guided by certain key goals and principles on the part of the government of Barbados. The goals included, goal 1 was transparency and accountability, as it was felt that all decisions in the town planning system should be made in a way that it would be clear who or what body has made the decision and why the decision had been made. Goal number 2 was the need for openness and inclusiveness, and the feeling that members of the public should be able to have input into the decision-making process, and where possible, decisions should be made public so that these individuals would have the right to have their views heard and to register their complaints. Goal number 3 was efficiency and effectiveness, and that was that decisions should be made in a timely manner, and that timescale should be adhered to by all parties. And this was a perennial complaint in terms of the duration of time it took in terms of getting responses from that department, and sometimes for very simple queries. Goal number 4 was that sustainable development of Barbados should be at front, and that any decisions made would be guided by the principles of sustainable development, ensuring long-term environment, looking at the long-term environmental problems, economic, community, and community health and well-being being all taken into consideration. And the final goal was that it be fit for purpose, that it should reflect the specific needs of Barbados as an island state in the 21st century. As I said, there were also some principles, and the first principle was that of good governance. And it was felt that this was critical, ensuring trust and confidence in the system. We often heard of comments and stories about alleged issues within the town and country planning department. And it was felt in terms of the principle, the guiding principles, principle number 1 would be on good governance, so as to reduce the potential for corruption in these matters. And principle number 2 spoke of the use of e-government in terms of making it much more efficient, that the town and country planning system should be computerized in a way that would allow easy access by the public to information and make it for more efficient consultation, and indeed to reduce the bureaucratic delays in that system. Principle number 3 was that of consultation and participation, and the ability and that the public should be involved in the process in terms of having the public understanding of the system and getting them to believe in it and to trust the whole system more than happens today. And principle number 4 was the need for proactive management and the need for development of a new culture within town and country planning, and indeed for public education as it relates to these matters. Mr. President, the new plan development bill, as my colleague over the other side said to me, it is quite technical, and I will ask that you bear with me as I try to go through aspects of this bill, which I figure will be of pertinence. Obviously, it is one of the most far-reaching reforms of this government so far. The entire orientation of the planning process is going to have to change. Decisions on denial or requiring conditions to a planning application will now have to be given in short and specific time frames. And all of this must be explained, and it can be challenged and must at the end of the day, pass the test of equal and fair treatment to all persons. It is obvious that planning decisions will follow from a plan that, as I said earlier, will promote sustainable development of Barbados while protecting our natural environment, and will all along the process be subject to consultation. However, the most fundamental change, it will be the role of the Town and Country Planning Development Office, as not simply as a regulator, but as a facilitator of sustainable development in Barbados. That they will see themselves as partners in the development of Barbados, and not only in terms of the limited regulation. The bill introduces the concept of provisional refusal, where clear explanations will be given on changes to a refused application. And this is something that's new. Normally you'll be told after so many weeks that your application is refused without any explanation. And some persons have gone through the process of reapplying again and having that denied without ever being told what or how they could have avoided it. And so there will be the concept of provisional refusal, where clear explanations will be given on the changes to a refused application so that it would allow that individual to make the recommended changes and have it approved when resubmitted. The bill also introduces fundamental changes to the governance of town and country planning in Barbados. I'm told that in the Commonwealth Caribbean there are 3 types. There's a ministerial-led, there's a concept of statutory corporation, and indeed there's a hybrid system which borrows from both of them. And in this particular system, we are looking at the hybrid system, which borrows from both. So we're going to look at a system where there is a minister. In terms of policy, you will have the board, which will look after a number of the applications, but it will not be a statutory corporation. It will just be using the statutory board, and I'll speak to that later. So it is a hybrid system that we'll be looking at. As I said, an addition, one important addition also would be, for the first time, the appointment of an appeals tribunal, which at the end of the day, individuals will be able, if they feel that they have not been given a fair hearing, that they can then resort to the appeals tribunal. As it would be in terms of roles, the minister would have full oversight and also be responsible for policy direction, and would be the person who will decide on applications of strategic importance. The Planning and Development Board will look at other applications for planning, but will not be able to delegate the responsibility for complex applications to the Chief Town Planner. They will now have to do some of that work. The Chief Town Planner obviously will be a member of the board and Executive Secretary, and will decide on simple applications and other things that come to him or her. Planning and Development Department will receive all applications, and they would make the recommendations as to, in terms of town planner to the board, etc. And of course, the appeals tribunal would hear appeals about decisions of the board or even the chief town planner. If I go to the actual bill itself, in terms of Part 1, and the bill is quite voluminous, in terms of Part 1, which deals with the interpretation, but also it speaks to the purpose. This is missing. I found it. I thought I was missing a page, Mr. in my bill. On page 19, it speaks to the purpose of this bill being to, as it was, to facilitate the development of land in a way that takes account of the social and economic and environmental needs of Barbados in terms of delivering higher standards of development in Barbados to promote health and well-being and protects our natural and cultural heritage. It speaks of providing efficient and accountable public services and the delivery of planning services. It speaks of enabling and encouraging high levels of public participation by providing appropriate access to public information as it relates to these matters, and indeed in terms of providing effective means of access to redress and remedies for people who feel aggrieved by actions of the department. In section 2, it deals with the administration, and as I said earlier, it speaks in terms of the new governance structure with the establishment of the Planning and Development Board. The board, as I said earlier, is a body corporate and will be responsible for implementing the policies framed by the minister. It wouldn't be a statutory corporation and therefore would avoid the additional high costs that sometimes normally associated with these corporations in Barbados. And I see my colleague Senator Nurse looking at me quizzically. The board will consist of a chief town planner and 12 persons and will be chaired by a chairperson who would be appointed by the minister, but who would not be a government employee. The board will comprise 4 ex officio members from the relevant government departments. And in addition, the minister will appoint 1 member on recommendation of the National Trust and 2 members after consultation with professional bodies representing professional land use planners, architects, engineers, and land surveyors, and 4 members drawn from the legal profession, financial institutions, private sector business, academia, or a non-governmental organization. So this is how the process is expected to be in terms of the selection of the board. And indeed, most importantly, Mr. President, all members of the board must have knowledge and experience of matters relevant to land development. Mr. President, it sets out that all members, apart from the ex officio members, will be able to serve a term not exceeding 3 years, but may be eligible for reappointment for another 3 years, provided they do not hold office for longer than 6 consecutive years. And of course, the rules relating to the conduct of the board are prescribed in terms of the voting arrangements and conflicts of interest, and etc. The board is expected to meet as frequently as will be necessary, but certainly at least once a month. And importantly, the minutes of the board will be public documents. In discussions around the Green Paper, there was support for the establishment of the board, but indeed there was some concerns of potential inefficiency because of the volume of work unless routine matters were delegated to the chief town planner, and this is the expectation. Indeed, Mr. President, in terms in Part 3, which speaks to the physical development plans, I think Barbados already has a well-established process as it relates to physical development plans. However, concerns were expressed in the consultations and that the status of the plan was not, or physical development plan wasn't clear enough, and there was limited scope to develop area-based plans, that the physical development plan focused on Barbados as a whole, without getting into the specifics as exists perhaps in London, where there's a plan for London, there's a plan for Birmingham, and there's a UK plan, and that we were limited in that respect. The proposed legislation now makes it clear that the board should give principal consideration to and be guided by the physical development plan in considering planning applications. But it also provides powers for preparing and approving physical development plans for parts of the island and for developing supplementary planning policy documents to guide development in Barbados. And indeed, the existing requirements for the review of the physical plan would be extended, it should be extended from 5 years as it currently is to 10 years to better reflect the long-term nature of plans and the practicalities of conducting this major review process. Such Part 4 spoke about regulation of land development. It uses the current definition of development. However, it speaks of building or engineering operations for or involving the demolition or alteration of listed buildings or a property within heritage conservation areas are now deemed to constitute development. And this is aimed at protecting listed buildings and other properties in what we call our heritage. The provisions are also made for publicity of applications and for the chieftain planner or the minister to take into account objections, representations, and comments made. As I said earlier, tight timelines are going to be kept, and these will be also imposed on referral agencies and limitations set for determining an application once a complete application is made. These will be 12 weeks for applications where an environmental impact assessment is required, 10 weeks for complex cases, and these are described in the first schedule, and 6 weeks for all other cases. Indeed, Mr. President, the time limits can be extended by agreement between the applicant and the chieftain planner, and not unilaterally as is currently the case, where you would be given a time and then it would be extended, and you would just hear about that when you inquired again. In this situation, if these time limits are not met, the applicant will now be able to appeal to the appeals tribunal. And indeed, if referral agencies fail to respond within the time allocated, the minister, the board, or the chieftain planner will make a decision without their input. Obviously, the chieftain planner may request further information within prescribed time limits, and obviously the time and processing of that application will not start until the required information that was requested is provided. I mentioned earlier that the legislation also produces new types of applications. These will include applications to determine whether permission is required. Some persons want to do things and they're not certain. In Barbados, there's now a plethora of persons using containers to sell food. And obviously, some of them are not certain if they require town and country planning permission. And this application will outline what is required in terms of doing things like that. Approvals in principle, I spoke about this earlier in terms of the approval that you were told, the provisional refusals, and of course the certificates of lawful use or development, which I believe a number of persons were asking and seeking to have something like this introduced. The approval in principle will replace the old outline permission, but it is not a planning permission, and it doesn't confer the right on the applicant to start construction. The purpose of that approval in principle is to allow developers the opportunity to test the acceptability of a development proposal concept before making major investment in a detailed design and work, and then learning that it is not going to be approved. It is thus made at the conceptual stage and may require an eventual environmental evaluation rather than a full EIA at that stage. So this is to allow persons to test the acceptability of if it's major development, how feasible and how successful it is likely to be. As I spoke earlier in terms of the provisional refusal, and this will be a new decision. And of course, as I said earlier, that process will also be time limited. The bill also sets out the requirements now for submitting a planning application the duration of the planning permission, and the commencement and completion of the development. There's been a concern, Mr. President, regarding the whole matter of environmental impact assessments in Barbados, and over the last few years especially, as it relates to major developments in Barbados. It's felt, interestingly, that Barbados has no legal basis at this point in time in law and criteria governing its use, and it is really not, and they're not explicit and consistent. And I found it surprising, given the issues over the years, you're told that you need an EIA, you need an EIA. So I was surprised, I was taken aback that it has no legal basis as a requirement at this point in time. However, as part of this bill, a legal basis for requiring environmental impact assessments, and also setting out the projects for which environmental impact assessments would be required, would be part of it, especially would be listed in Schedule 3. So that is one of the new things that will be coming out of this. Mr. President, the whole issue of planning obligations for an applicant in terms of a development for a housing project where the existing legislation limits planning obligations to requirements for provision of affordable housing. It is now the scope is going to be widened now in terms of the use of planning obligations, and set down certain rules for the implementation, modification, and discharge of these obligations. And these might be speaking in terms of enhanced beach access and facilities linked to a beachfront property. If you want to develop it, it might be part of your remit that you will have to provide facilities at the beach for the general public to have use of, so that we wouldn't have golden toilets in Bath St. John or silver toilets in Bay Street. But it will be part of the requirement of the developer. I'm sharing it equally, Mr. President. I'm balancing it. Or if you're doing a private school, you might be additional, in terms of additional classrooms. If there's a new residential development that you might want to do that. And of course, the need in terms of this having green spaces, but also indeed providing basic exercise equipment in these developments. So these might be part of the planning obligations that you would have to ensure implemented as part of your access or the agreement that you enter in with town and country planning. I spoke earlier about ministers still giving direction in terms of policy and in certain types of applications going to the minister. And these will, of course, these applications, although they're going to the minister, they will be dealt with first by the chief town planner and submitted to the minister. So they don't just go to him in terms of strategic importance. They have to go through the entire vetting process. And if the applicant or the objector, or if the chief town planner desires, they may present their case in writing or appear before and heard by a member of the appeals tribunal, who will then report to the minister. So this gives an additional layer of protection, so that ministers are not accused of indulging in activities in which they shouldn't rightly be indulging in. Of course, in this process also, strict time limits will be imposed, including the decision by the minister, so that we wouldn't have a decision, for example, on a cement facility at Spring Garden taking over a year for the minister to give the okay, which he finally did, which the Minister of Town and Country Planning in April 2018. No politics. Now, Mr. President, as I said earlier, there will be the introduction of the appeals tribunal, and any applicant who is aggrieved by the decisions of the board or the chief town planner may appeal to the tribunal, but within 28 days. The composition of that is dealt with further down in the bill itself. and the detailed regulations, and in particular the new development orders, will be prepared as expected, anticipated after the enactment of this bill. And that will cover other areas. In terms of Part 5, building, engineering, and subdivision plans, the bill makes it clear that certain types of building plans include in their applications for planning permission must be stamped and signed by a registered engineer or architect, and identifies other developments which do not need certification by one of these registered professionals. And I believe, Mr. President, the issue arose in terms of the draftsman, and this was the category of, and this was raised in some of the consultation. And the bill has been amended in terms of the definition of a dwelling house to allow the draftsmen to continue to ply their trade in that regard. And there was some concern that they were being excluded, and this was a body of people who had played a very important role in the past, and they were now going to be excluded. Now, provision is also made in terms of the, I spoke about the open space and all of that already. I can move on to section 6, because I think I spoke to most of those things in terms of planning permission, protection of cultural and natural heritage. And we know that Barbados has a wealth of heritage assets, not as many now as we had a few decades ago. But also there's the traditional Barbadian vernacular architecture, and this relates to some of our housing stock. And this has contributed in terms of the character of the island, both historically and in terms of tourism over the years. However, much of this built heritage is in poor condition and indeed at risk of loss. The existing legislation is weak and very limited as it was, and penalties for non-compliance were so low that there was no deterrent. People would just remove them, demolish them. Part 6 now seeks to strengthen the provisions and bring the demolition or alteration of listed buildings within the remit of planning control, as recommended by the National Trust recommended this provision. It also formalizes the process of listing of buildings, including publishing and adopting the list of cultural heritage buildings, monuments, and sites. It makes it clear that no one can demolish or make material alterations to listed properties or site without first obtaining planning permission. However, exceptions are made in case of the execution of emergency work required in the interest of public safety or the preservation of a listed building or neighboring property, provided it is certified by a registered architect or engineer. That is the work. There's also provisions for emergency listing to provide interim protection to an unlisted building where the minister deems it necessary until it can be formally included in that list. Powers are also formally designated for the formal designation of a heritage conservative area, and this would be, you designate that area so that it is a heritage conservation area. In those areas, demolition or alteration to buildings would obviously also require planning permission. Similar provisions are also now being, this is very important, for the protection of areas of natural beauty in Barbados or interest, including submarine and subterranean areas, for example, like the caves, Harrison Cave, and for the making of tree preservation orders for the preservation of trees, groups of trees, and woodlands. I believe all members are aware in Barbados that the quickest thing, the first thing that is done in terms of development is to clear it, not only the bush, but all the trees that are there. And these, we've seen the loss of mahogany trees and several other varieties of trees over the years, and they're not easily replaced. But certainly in terms of our development in the past, it has been in terms of clearing and making room for development without looking as it was at the importance of preservation. So the tree preservation orders were for the preservation of the trees and groups of trees and woodlands. And the board is also to ensure that adequate provisions are made for the preservation or planting of trees by the imposition of conditions when planning permission is being given. That in other words, developers will part of that process of obligations will have to plant certain trees and numbers of trees depending on the area. Now, Mr. President, and I think this is a very interesting one, and this is one that will bring smiles to a number of other members in this chamber, and certainly agreement, I'm sure, that general provisions will now also be made for the service of a notice on owners of buildings, vacant sites, and open land whose properties are despoiling the amenity of any part of Barbados, and indeed in terms of the accumulation of vermin and rats and the spread of leptospirosis. And this is something that we have been plagued with in Barbados for several years and don't seem how to deal with it. About over 10 years ago, when I was Minister of Health, it was a matter that we raised at that time, where we thought that if the Ministry of Health, the bushing teams, cleared a vacant lot, that you could then look at some way of putting it onto their land. That's what we were told that legislation didn't provide for that. In this situation, you're saying that the government, based on this bill, will have to enter into the land and carry out the work in default and recover the costs. There are a range of offenses for owners or occupiers who contravene the restrictions imposed on listed buildings, etc. And as I said earlier, the current penalties do not reflect the severity. In this setting, they'll also be looking at imposing penalties on persons and trying to recover costs, which government will then, in terms of entering onto the demolishing of abandoned houses, clearing vacant lots, etc. That the authorities will be doing it, but they will also seek to recover the costs. Part 7 speaks of the control of outdoor advertisements, and 8 speaks to the matter of enforcement. So often we come to this honorable chamber and we pass all sorts of pristine legislation, be it related to road traffic or whatever, and then it falls down at the point of enforcement. This new legislation will retain the 4-year period for initiation of action and transfers the responsibility for enforcement to the board, where, for example, the development is carried out without planning permission or in breach of conditions, which was stated, the board may serve the owner and occupier of the land with an enforcement notice. Said note the breach of planning control and the steps that the developer must take to remedy the breach. Where the development consists of or includes the carrying out of building or other operations, the board may also serve a stop notice requiring works for the development cited in the enforcement notice to cease immediately. If the developer fails to comply with the enforcement notice within the specified time, the chief town planner may enter upon the land and take steps required by the notice and recover the costs of doing so from the owner. A person served may also be prosecuted and fined for non-compliance. Mr. President, I think you're aware that under the existing legislation, a person served with an enforcement notice has the right to appeal to the judge in chambers against the notice, but a stop notice can only be challenged by judicial review in the High Court. This is indeed an anomaly, and this bill seeks to rectify that. And both notices now, for a speedier process, will be with the judge in chambers. It's felt generally that throughout in these matters, current levels of penalties are too small and do not constitute a deterrent. And certainly it is felt that the current bill would allow for more appropriate penalties to be applied. Part 9 speaks to the acquisition of land for planning purposes and the matter of compulsory purchase. And 10 speaks to compensation in terms of the acquisition and stuff like that. In Part 11 speaks to planning appeals. As I said, it provides for the tribunals to hear planning appeals. The present system sets out no timeline for decisions, and this has resulted in large backlogs and delays in terms of the present appeals process. I mentioned it earlier, what is being proposed is a tribunal of 3 members appointed from a broader panel of 6 to 9 people on a rotation basis. The panel will be appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister, but will be required to have a minimum of 5 years of practical experience in the fields of law, physical development planning, environmental management, coastal zone management, architecture, surveying, or land development. No one having a conflict of interest in a case may be appointed, obviously, to hear that case. And the work of the tribunal will be managed by the clerk of the tribunal, who will be appointed by the permanent secretary in the ministry. Obviously, this tribunal will adjudicate on decisions made by the board or the chief town planner, and certain persons aggrieved by decisions made in respect of will have the right of appeal to the tribunal, as I said earlier. And I said earlier also the time frame in which they will have to appeal. Clear timelines for exchange of evidence and the holding of an inquiry will be applied, and the decision of the appeals panel will be delivered within 14 days of the conclusion of the hearing, and the appellant shall be notified of the decision with a statement of reasons and the decision that shall be published and made available to members of the public at the department and in electronic form and on the internet. Excuse me. Mr. President, Part 12 deals with miscellaneous aspects in terms of the need for a register. And indeed, I should state, importantly, under this part, under miscellaneous process, persons willfully given false information in order to obstruct the exercise of powers under this new bill will have deemed to have committed an offense, as are public officers, board or tribunal members who solicit or accept bribes, and any person offering a bribe also commits an offense and is liable to the prescribed penalties. And I think this speaks to some of the anecdotal stories that we've heard in the past. Any public officer, board, or tribunal member who fails to declare a conflict of interest or to recuse themselves from the decision-making process will also be guilty of an offense. Mr. President, as I said at the beginning, an important piece of legislation. We're looking to transform the entire process in terms of planning and development in Barbados. One that is long overdue. And as I said earlier, it will need for a whole process of re-education, not only in terms of the public, but also in terms of the officers and public services working in that department. Obviously, the way of doing things now will have to be re-engineered. The introduction of new technology oftentimes meets with resistance. The persons are accustomed to doing things in a specific way for years, and there's always a resentment for change. I'm pleased to say that in this regard, a start has already been made, and there's a new standard operating system which has been introduced this month in that department, and they starting to work the process and getting the staff involved in the entire changeover. However, above all, there will have to be a change in the entire culture of that department, where, as I said earlier, it needs to stop seeing itself as a regulator, but now as a facilitator of the overall development of Barbados, and to become more proactive and implementing the change. Obviously, it requires clear and decisive and visionary leadership in terms of leading the entire process. Staff will require new skills. It is an ambitious program in terms of especially timelines and what will be required. And obviously, new governance structures will take some time. There will be some teething problems which will have to be surmounted. Mr. President, I believe I've said more than enough in terms of the details of this very important bill. And I commend it to all honorable senators, and I hope that, like me, they will see the wisdom indeed in supporting this bill at this time in terms of the economic development and infrastructure development of Barbados. I'm obliged to you, Mr. President.
Senator Franklin.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Sir, I have this complaint always, and I will keep it on the record whenever I have to speak in situations like this. This is a very important piece of legislation that should not be rushed. It was rushed. Then you want to have a little consultation at Sherburne, you don't call it Sherburne, no. And you get a minister to stand up and mislead the public, because a lot of the things I heard with the minister speaking.
Mr. President,
Yes.
point of order. I hate to interrupt the honorable member when he's obviously trying to reflect and try to ascertain what the bill is about, having not read it. But you surely cannot describe the extensive consultation involved as a little consultation at Sherburne. There were at least 2 consultations back in July. There was consultations in October, with the formulation of the green paper, and as recently as last Monday, Mr. Chair. So indeed, the honourable member is, I believe, I don't know if he's in some sort of degeneration of his grey matter, but certainly those cannot be constituted of one little consultation.
Mr. President, the poppy show that they call consultation is hardly consultation. What we need, and this is what the law requires. You come here and you do the first reading, send it to the printery to be published, and it's circulated. When you see the official gazette, you see something called objects and reasons. That is when the bill comes out for the whole country to see. This government has been sneaking legislation past people in this country who have interest in these pieces of legislation by coming to this, but the Parliament, and refusing to follow standard operating procedures. You waive the standing orders and you get your way. We had it last month too when they came in here and quickly by sliding through an amendment to the Income Tax Act where the Prime Minister's father could get away with his taxes between 1968 and 2000. All of this is happening here, and something has to stop. It has to stop. This government is
I am
is
really
behaving.
sorry. On a point of order, Mr. President,
Senator Hayes on the
I
point of order.
really was trying to avoid disrupting him, but he truly is misleading the House. This government was merely about 3 weeks old when the very first stakeholder consultation was held. It allowed all stakeholders, members of the architectural community, members of the building community, all got together, put their heads together. The green paper for this was published on the Government Information Service website since October. It was accessible to the public. Further, the public was allowed to give their input, and all of that was factored in before the final draft of the bill was prepared. So suggesting that was rushed or that we haven't given the public the opportunity to voice themselves is not fair. I heard Minister Cattle on brass tacks. She fielded questions from a range of people. I saw her on CBC up to last week. And more than any other piece of legislation, I find it very difficult to believe that you could argue that this one is one that the public has not been given the opportunity to give their input on. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would wish that they would sit down and keep quiet and let me make my presentation instead of interrupting, because they're not going to stop me from saying what I want to say in here. You know, this nonsense about distracting me and getting instructions from the leader of the Senate.
Have a restraint, please.
The Senate to bamboozle me with nonsense. It is nonsense, complete nonsense. What they did on brass tacks and wherever else they had it does not suffice. And I heard some of the statements made by the minister, and she was misleading the country. She didn't know what she was talking about. But you see, this problem here is that the government, since they came into office, have been addressing issues for the people they care about, their special interest groups. Case in point, the architects, and this is a BLP habit. They go and they look for their friends, and they listen to what they tell them, and they pass legislation to disadvantage people. You have architects who can't find work. Go and look for something else to do. You know? But instead, they make little deals with the government telling them, one, we can't have draftsmen drafting buildings. A draftsman could draft a building for as high as you can get it. The problem doesn't require a draftsman, you know. The problem is that you must have a structural engineer to tell you if it can stand up. So if an architect draws a building, who's to say that that building will stand up? You need a structural engineer. So if you are saying to me that you need to make sure the buildings are going to be safe, then you need a structural engineer. An architect is not a structural engineer. He could draw any fancy thing. But no, the architects now want to get their way, and they were able to prevail on the government to limit the work that can be done by draftsmen, who have been doing excellent work in this country.
On a point of order, Mr. President, I believe Senator Franklin, once again seems to be attempting to mislead the House and the public. Clause 44 of the bill speaks to what he's alluding to. And between basically the relationship that pertains to architects, draftsmen, and so on, and I'm aware of some of what was ventilated in the public domain. Standards matter. The reality is that anybody with a CXC in technical drawing could call themselves a draftsman, and standards should matter in the interest of public safety. The bill, even so, as the Honourable Leader of Government Business indicated when he first rose, actually the final draft of the bill allows draftsmen to be allowed to continue to draft plans for buildings up to 10 stories. These very, very, very specific details here where the public is protected and...
very long.
I'm sorry.
But
But the interest of draftsmen has been addressed in the final draft of the bill, sir.
Very good.
Why you don't stick to medicine? Why you don't stick to medicine? It is not 10 stories, it's 10 units, okay? That I read it, you see, I saw it in here. I read it. So don't come trying to give the public the impression I don't read. I read every day. And I read the nonsense that the government has been putting out and bamboozling people in this country with. What you have done, or what you attempted to do, was to lick out all of those draftsmen from getting work for your special interest group of architects. Architects cannot determine if they can draw a structure, make it look real pretty and stuff. But unless you have an engineer, structural engineer, that can tell you if what the architect puts in drawings will stand up. So you can have a fellow who doesn't have a CXE draw a building. That doesn't mean it will stand up. You depend on a structural engineer. So the architect should require a structural engineer to look at his thing, not certified by an architect, because he ain't gonna know. So don't come telling me this thing, oh, I tell you I was involved in building? Oh yes, I think so. I know all about the structural engineers and stuff, quantity surveyors and everything you need to do. But what I'm telling you is, you see, when you work like me, and people like you get rid of me, I have to work finding other things to do. When the structural engineer certifies that this building will stand up, that is what you need. You don't need an architect certifying it because he will draw any fancy thing. The draftsman, most draftsmen do the drawing, and the architect just stamp them and sign off on them. They don't sorry, but architects don't do the drawings, you know. It is the draftsmen who do the actual work. So what you are attempting to do is what the Barbados Labour Party did when they were dealing with the telecoms. You decided that only men who can, certified persons can wire your house with a telephone. There was no danger, there was nothing needed to be corrected, but you stopped people from wiring up their own house. Now you're doing the same thing again because you wanted to provide work for a certain group of people. And you're doing it again here. You know? You don't need any special qualification to draw. You need a special qualification to determine if that drawing will stand up when you put it, and you need a good builder. If you were saying to me that you need builders, I recall when they were building the property which now, which used to house Personal Administration Division before the bed bugs. I was passing there, and they looked at the structure, and they said to me, that ain't gonna stand up. Just by their observation, and all they did was do, I'm no draftsman. And they mentioned it to a builder friend of mine, and he knew the architect. He went to him. And you know they put up columns? Because the span was too long. And I saw that with my own two eyes. And I made the recommendation. I observed it. So don't tell me you need a structural engineer. A draftsman could drop it. And the thing is, an architect do that one, you know. I meant to check. It didn't stand up. So you don't need to disadvantage architects and then throw back a bone, because I heard the Prime Minister say that they will amend the act so as to give them the right to think. Man, they can draw anything they want to draw. Stop trying to satisfy special interest groups. The first thing you did when you came into office, because you know you were being guided by the people who give you leaks in the public service. So you elevated those leaks into policy. And that's where you come up with this. You know? Because a lot of what you are saying is untrue. The special interest group, you have a consultant who is one of the stakeholders dealing with town planning on a daily basis. That person was able to go in and pull out all of their clients' things and get them approved. That's what you do in consultants. What is this all about? So stop this nonsense, you know. This government is fast becoming like the last administration. You're becoming corrupt. And you're becoming corrupt, and you're doing it through legislation. It is unfortunate that
Section 34 of your standing orders. You're coming close to imputing improper motives to members of the other place, or even Senator Walcott himself. Your language is sometimes insulting and offensive. I would suggest that you reacquaint yourself with Section 34 and conduct yourself with much more restraint than you're presently doing, please.
Sir, I am guided by you, sir, but they're not being...
Mr. President, I really can't allow the honourable member to go on. He said the government has become corrupt. I'm asking that comment be withdrawn.
Yes, and I think that it should be withdrawn. You have the opportunity. I'll strike it from the record.
Sir, your ruling, sir, if you want to strike it from the record, that is your prerogative. But I have not said anything in here that I regret. So if you want to strike it from the record, sir,
The test is not whether
so
you
be it.
regret it.
Sir, you have the power to strike it. If you want to strike it, sir, go right ahead. I have said what I mean and what I've observed since this government came into office.
Well, I order that it be struck from the record.
As the president pleases, sir. One thing, sir, I heard the minister say is that town planning decisions, the minister who spoke on brass tacks, that you weren't given reasons for refusal. That is untrue. Every person who makes an application before the town planning department and it is refused, they are given sometimes as many as 3 reasons why it has been refused. You know, this is nothing new. You're not starting anything new. This is already the case. But again, government knows what it's doing, at least thinks it knows what it's doing, and they're coming in here and they are giving people the impression that what they are doing is new. Case in point, you mentioned, sorry, when I said you, sir, I mean the leader of the government business, mentioned that, you know, we have these derelict buildings and stuff that this no act will take care of. That power already exists in the Housing Act, you know? But, so it is nothing new. They're rushing in here and putting a lot of things in place, trying to give the country the impression that they're doing something. That power is there, and people have not been using it. Use it. It is Section 11 of the Housing Act. Check it and see that you don't have to legislate it again. The corporation can remove derelict buildings or buildings that are causing a threat to health or whatever. But you're rushing to doing it now. So you're rushing to do something that's already in place, trying to give the country the impression that you are doing something. Next thing, sir. They talk about files taking 14 months in town planning and all kind of stuff. Again, misleading. Yes, it might take 14 months, some may 16 months, maybe 2 years. But could you deny that right now there are over 400 files that are awaiting the Prime Minister's attention? 400. Going back to more than one Prime Minister. Because the town planners have certain restrictions on the approvals that they can grant. It has to go to the minister. And there it sits. Like, for instance, Corvallis thing got done in 3 days. The minister can push things forward. But other people who are waiting, their things stay on the minister's table, and the last minister, Lord, on his table even longer. While you're giving the impression that the staff in the town planning department are lazy, they're not doing their job and all kind of stuff. That is unfair. I heard another minister complain that, no, not you. I said another minister. Another minister complained, and I saw it in the Barbados there because I read every day, complaining about the staff in the department and the work they're doing. The staff are doing the best they can within the limits that they're allowed. That is the problem, you know. You have 400 files waiting for a decision, and everybody is cursing the town planners because the decisions are not made, but they're decisions that they cannot make. And the decisions rest with a Prime Minister who, in most cases, know nothing about planning. The Prime Minister can then involve experts if they choose, or they can sign off on them and go along with the business. So what we need is a system where the minister is taken out of the approval process, because that is not the function of a minister, and it should not be the function of a minister. Ministers should be involved in the policy and leave that. These fellows at the town planning, some of whom I represent, so I have to declare my interest. Some of whom I represent are trained professionals who are overruled by a person just because that person is elected, that know nothing about planning. I'm not speaking to this Prime Minister or the last, I'm talking about all Prime Ministers who have done it. We've had a situation where Prime Minister approved the changing of the zones for water. You know, I ain't got no expertise in it. All they had really was a person who was their friend, and they accommodate their friends. It is unfortunate, and we have a situation, according to my instructions, that applications are fast-tracked at town planning on a regular basis. So the ministers call and say, I want this here done, and it's done. So the people who are in the queue have to go back. So we need less ministerial interference at the town planning department and allow those trained professionals to get on with their job. You know? This is not, we have right now 15 persons at town planning who can make decisions. But they are not allowed to make decisions because of policy. And then they are blamed for not making the decision. It is unfair to them. And people then go on the radio and TV and say the worst things about them and stuff. And these are people who cannot then speak and defend themselves, because you cannot, as a public officer, speak on government issues to the press, so they have to grin and bear it. While ministers who should know better attack them too. Ministers under the Westminster system of government do not attack civil servants. They represent them, and if they need to do something, it is done from the glare of the public. But no, we want to look good, and we want to make people feel that we are doing something, and we attack and vilify hard-working public servants who are doing, as I said, the best they can. This legislation introduces a board and has relegated the chief town planner, as according to my notes here, I said secretary, but I wrote gopher. You go for it. They've actually emasculated the, she's already emasculated. They're emasculated the chief town planner. You know, he's now a secretary to a board. That don't really need to exist. If you really needed a board, the board should be the appeal thing. Let the town planners who are trained to do what they're doing. Sorry, sir, I should have gone back. Let me go back to something else I was talking about, the delay. The delay in the town planning department, aside from being on the minister's desk, also come about because you require consultations from different agencies. Coastal Conservation, Environmental Protection Department, MTW, and the town planners have to wait for the Thank you, sir. The town planners have to wait, I said, Environmental Division, MTW, Fire Service, a whole list of people. If these approvals are not given, the town planner hands are tied. We go and, but you have here now a situation at section 28.3. And I don't understand what that means. If you look, since you all read, section 28.3, clause 28.3, because it's still in a bill, suggests that if these approvals are not, or the comments are not given in a particular time, you can disregard them, and the board or the minister can proceed to determine the applications. Does this also apply to environmental impact assessment? Because, again, that sounds to me like a special interest group looking, they say, look, we want this thing done, these people can be back. We want the higher bill. You know? This is what is in this bill, you know. So I don't understand it myself, but I hope it doesn't mean that the board can waive or disregard things like environmental, the environmental department, environmental impact studies, or you know, other geotechnical studies too. Because I remember some time ago when they were building the building at Warren, the bark building, they didn't do all the necessary work. And when the backhoe was digging the foundation, it fell 40 feet into a cave. Why? Because the necessary work that you are now proposing that you can overlook wasn't done. You remember the building in Burton's Hill where this family lost their lives? Right? Did we have the geotechnical studies and stuff to make sure that that building could be sited in that property? No. And you are now proposing that they can be overlooked. in accordance with Section 28.3. You know, so that's what I'm telling you. Special interest groups have, if not drafted this bill, determined what will go into it. There's no, this bill doesn't need to be rushed. This is something, and this little Pappy Show stuff at Sherburne and from Barbados and stuff does not replace careful study. Government is moving with speed to get things done, but they're not thinking. Town planning, you have people doing the assessments on these plans that you send home the clerical staff. So the people know who are actually going to be approving these plans have to go and do clerical work. And now you're complaining about delays. I think delays, you are making sure that there are delays so you can do what you want to do. You know? That's what it's all about. You are setting up a straw man to knock it down. You are giving yourselves reasons to do things. You are saying, look, these things are wrong. You know why they're wrong, why they're taking so long? Because you make sure that it happens, that they take long to happen. And then you blame these officers who cannot defend themselves. Well, I will defend them as best I can. But unfortunately, government is already on this course of action without advice from sane people. They're only listening to, as I said, these special interest groups who determine what we want in the legislation, and they will get it by hook and mostly by crook. No one, sir, ever speaks about the good work done in the town planning office, but even with the constraints that they have. We have a bloated cabinet who ain't got much to do, and what they're going to do is to take it out on poor civil servants and making them the object of scorn and ridicule in this country. You know? And because you always support it, you know, because you are instructed to support it. But I have grave difficulty with most of what you have here in this bill. It sounds pretty, but it is not necessary. And if it were at all judged to be necessary, you should have done it the right way. But you are hell-bent on getting your friends' interests secured without looking at the consequences of your actions. And this has been the hallmark of this administration since it came to office. Yeah, I know. There's one good thing about, even though I don't support this bill, there's one good thing about it. I mean, as you are doing, and this is the structure, if you're going to continue with it, it is the hybrid system that the minister spoke about, where the board will stick to planning decisions and leave the civil servants to do their job. They need more of that. Right? But that is another issue, and I will speak to that at another time. So that is the only thing I have. If you're going to insist on having this on yearly board, and mind you, you are saying that this board will only be responsible for, and I got it written down here, complicated, the complicated ones, you know, the things that have a little bit more thing. That is not what the Act says. That is not what the Act says. It says the board is responsible for all, except the ones referred to the minister. But then it goes on later down in the act to say that the board can delegate certain things to the chief town planner, and the chief town planner then can also then assign that work to some of his staff with the approval of the board. You see, I read. Sir, but that does not take away the responsibility of the board. That doesn't mean that the board can't come and say, look, fellas, don't worry about this thing, I can deal with this one. The uncomplicated ones, because the overriding thing is that the board is responsible for all applications except the ones referred to the minister. I don't think that's what we want to do. You want the ones that have some level of complexity in it to have a second sight. You are saying one thing in the legislation, and you're going to come up with a policy that people always ignore government policy when it suits them. You know? And I don't want a situation now where the board comes in and starts talking, oh, you don't need to do anything. We can do all, because the legislation said that they can. The legislation gives them the power to delegate some. But that is not what I am hearing from the debate in the other place or from the debate so far this morning. We are setting up a system that really and truly the old system just need tweaking. It didn't need this. But you have it because your special interest groups determine that this is what they want. Right? Get out of these technical things. You know, you don't know anything about it, and you rush and do these things for your friends. I keep that from day one in this place. It has been a friendship thing over and over and over. You are not governing for the interests of all Barbadians. You are governing for the interests of your friends. Oops. Mr. Deputy President, I'm going to wind up now, but I want to put a word of caution to the minister and the government. You are supposed to govern this country. That is your remit. But when you are governing this country, you are to make sure that the interests of all your citizens and all the people in this country taken care of, not just the people who come and have the Prime Minister's ear or the Minister of this body's ear or next. This is what's happening here with this bill. It is unfortunate that the government continues to misbehave in terms of ignoring normal procedures, because this morning is the first time I got a copy of this bill in writing. I've had it on the computer, and my problem is that when I'm reading, I like to go back and come forward and pull back and stuff, and that's a bit difficult for me when I'm looking at one screen. You need the Thank you, sir. You need to do things the proper way. It is time, because every bill that comes to this house is always some emergency. We want done it fast. And as a result, you are making a lot of mistakes. Like, for instance, at section 6, clause 6:13, it says minutes should be done in the, let me get it here for you, man, because it's funny. Minutes in proper form of each meeting of the board shall be taken in proper form and kept by the executive secretary. Gobbledygook. You want to know why? Because you rush to get things done to suit your friends and even making sense. And it making the draftsman and the Attorney General's office look foolish because they are the persons that you can blame for this. Do it. Take your time.
Senator, to say that it's being done to suit your friends is to attribute improper motives.
Well, sir, I wouldn't want to do that, and I will withdraw.
Yes, thank you.
They might not be friends. They're doing it for their enemies. But whoever they're doing it for, sir, it is wrong. They are rushing legislation in this place. They are not giving, certainly the opposition, enough advance notice to go through these things to see if we can make suggestions to make them better. What you are doing, you're rushing it, and then you're getting it wrong. This one, you get this one wrong, you know? But you will do it in proper form. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I next recognize Senator
No, you can
Wiggins.
cast
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to give support to this bill, and primarily because as an individual, normally years ago when I built my house, I applied to town planning. And the first thing somebody would ask you, you have a friend in there? Because if you don't have a friend in town planning, you couldn't get your application approved. And as far as I can see, this bill is providing a great deal of transparency to the application process of simple individuals in this country who are applying, let's say, just on a domestic level, not speaking on the commercial level, to persons who are building, hotels and so on. So if you didn't have a friend in town planning department, your application would take a long time. And if your application was denied, there was no mechanism by which an individual can appeal. And this bill is now providing for appeals process whereby a person, if I apply for planning process, I can now appeal if I'm turned down in the first instance where I have made that application. So I think the appointment of the appeals tribunal is a good thing in relation to this board, the board for the appeals. So I support that 100%. So what I have noticed, as I said, in coming back to Barbados, is that a lot of the legislation that I see coming before this House now is that the government is seeking to bring Barbados into the international arena. Last week I wasn't here. I was very sorry I wasn't here to speak on that public management finance bill after being a member of the subcommittee and doing so much work on it. But that, to my mind, was another great piece of legislation that was brought to this House, because we have to remember that Barbados, this is a new era. It's a new era. Barbados is moving into a different phase. And we have to come back on the international stage in a big way. So it may appear to some members of this House that the legislation is being rushed, but as you know, we are now with the IMF and so on, and there's certain things that have to be done and done in an appropriate time. I too heard the minister from the other place on brass stats, and I heard her as well on television, and she was very eloquent, I find, in terms of the explanations and the questions that that she fielded in relation to this bill. And I think that this bill is going to, with everything else as it comes through, you might have to tweak it along the way, because sometimes we don't always get it right the first time. Life is not perfect. So I noticed as well that for some applications, it's going to take 12 weeks, especially if an EIA is required. It's going to take 10 weeks for complex cases, and for simple applications for housing, it should take about 6 weeks. So I think that, and including the draftsmen in the adjustment that they can now bill is 10 units now, drawings for 10 units is a good thing, because I noticed there was protests where that was concerned, and the appropriate amendment was made. What I wasn't sure about, sir, maybe you can explain it to me, because the garrison and its environment and its environs are part of the UNESCO heritage sites. And I would like to know how does that fit in with the new application process in terms of listed and protected buildings in that complete geographical space. So I would say in relation to this bill, and as I said, it wasn't going to be long, I really want to give my support. And I think that if we have any objections to any areas that are outlined in the bill, that we can always list our objections. But as I said, things are not perfect. But I see this government, as an independent senator, I'm saying to you, I see this government as trying to put Barbados back on a sound footing in terms of the pieces of legislation that is coming to this House, whether it's this planning and development bill, the immigration bill, or the public finance management bill, because we have to look at all these pieces of legislation together as a whole. You know, we might be debating them separately, but it is a case where the government is trying to put Barbados back on a sound footing. They're trying to examine the issues of transparency. You're also seeing whereby if I'm unhappy about an application, I can now appeal to a board, and I think those things are going to augur well for the future. So, Mr. President, with those few words, I'm obliged to you.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this sitting be now suspended until 2:15 for lunch.
Suspended until 2:15 for lunch. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. We are now in the suspension for lunch.
First,